Holding the final medical report tightly in my hands, I stepped out of the Madison Hospital doors. I am Kendra, a woman who had just miraculously escaped a death sentence from a severe neurodegenerative disease. Taking a deep breath of the crisp air felt like breathing true life into my lungs for the first time in months. The crushing psychological burden of my terrifying illness practically vanished because I had officially crossed back over the boundary of life and death. With my hands still trembling slightly from overwhelming excitement, I eagerly dialed my father's number to share the miraculous news that I assumed my entire family had been desperately waiting to hear. "Dad, I'm recovered!" I practically shouted into the receiver while tears of pure joy streamed down my face. I fully expected a burst of happy tears or at least a warm word of congratulations from the man who raised me. Instead of relief, a chillingly indifferent voice echoed through the speaker with no trace of affection whatsoever. "There's nothing to celebrate," he replied with a tone so cold it pierced straight through my chest before the line went dead with a sharp click. I stood completely frozen among the bustling crowds of people rushing past me on the sidewalk, while my heart almost stopped beating from the sudden shock. A terrifying realization began to settle into my mind as I slowly understood that a cruel truth was hiding right behind the loving facade of my own family. What do you think about this story? How would you react if you were in that situation? And which city are you watching from? Please share in the comments. Years ago, I actually lived a remarkably stable and predictable life before everything around me began to unravel. I spent a full decade building a thriving career and a peaceful home, alongside my former husband Mitchell. We worked tirelessly side by side to establish ourselves professionally, while nurturing a marriage built on deep mutual respect. Our days flowed in a comfortable rhythm of shared ambitions and quiet evenings spent planning for a future filled with children. That comforting illusion of permanence completely collapsed during a routine medical checkup when my doctor discovered a severe illness invading my uterus. The medical specialists gave me absolutely no alternatives to consider if I wanted to survive the rapidly progressing disease. I was forced to undergo an immediate surgical removal of the affected organs to save my own life. Waking up from that procedure meant accepting the harsh reality that I had permanently lost the physical ability to ever bear children naturally. The physical recovery took several agonizing weeks inside the sterile hospital room before I could return to my normal routine. Yet the lingering mental toll of this permanent loss proved to be far more difficult to endure. The following months turned into long nights filled with silent torment as we both struggled to navigate this painful new reality. Mitchell never blamed me for my medical condition or uttered a single cruel word about our ruined family plans. However, I could clearly see the quiet heartbreak hidden in his eyes whenever we walked past families playing with their kids in our neighborhood. We eventually sat down together at our kitchen table for a heartbreakingly frank conversation about what our future should truly look like. We made the mutual decision to part ways peacefully so he could find another woman to fulfill his ultimate dream of becoming a father. We cried together that night while acknowledging that our romantic journey had finally reached its unavoidable conclusion. Our separation process proceeded with an unusual level of civility that actually shocked the legal professionals handling our paperwork. We never engaged in loud arguments or threw objects across the room in sudden fits of bitter resentment. Neither of us resorted to tossing ugly insults or smearing each other's reputations during our mandatory appearances inside the courthouse. We simply treated the dissolution of our decade-long bond with the exact same quiet respect we had always shown one another during our marriage. Our lawyers only needed to draft the standard legal documents to finalize the dissolution without mediating any fierce custody battles over property. Mitchell proactively insisted on transferring a massive portion of our shared assets into my sole possession before finalizing the paperwork. He formally signed over several prime real estate properties alongside millions of dollars in highly profitable corporate stocks. He explicitly stated this wealth was meant to serve as a solid financial guarantee to completely secure my solitary future. He wanted to ensure I would never have to worry about basic survival or expensive medical bills for the remainder of my life. I tried to refuse the excessive amount initially out of sheer guilt over failing to give him a family, yet he firmly refused to let me walk away empty-handed after a decade of solid partnership together. I officially stepped into my new single life holding an immense fortune that most people could only dream of acquiring. All that money could not bandage the deep physical wound scarring my body or fill the extreme emptiness echoing throughout my soul. I found myself wandering through a massive empty house completely alone while trying to figure out how to rebuild my identity from scratch. The silence inside those walls constantly reminded me of the beautiful family I would never be able to grow. I desperately needed to find a new sense of belonging to anchor myself during this incredibly difficult transition period of my life. A few months after the divorce was finalized, I completely packed up my remaining belongings to permanently leave my previous city behind. I purchased a spacious new residence in Madison, Wisconsin, to live near my father Paul and my mother Shirley, in hopes of finding genuine family warmth. Returning to my hometown felt like a necessary step to rebuild my shattered foundation after spending so much time navigating the painful medical issues and legal separation entirely alone. I desperately craved the comforting familiarity of my childhood environment to help me forget the extreme emptiness echoing through my solitary existence. Moving back to this territory also meant reuniting with my brother Dexter, who still resided under the exact same roof he grew up under. He was a notoriously lazy man suffering from long-term unemployment while comfortably surviving entirely on the blind financial support continuously provided by our parents. He spent his days avoiding any form of real responsibility while expecting others to constantly cater to his endless personal demands without offering anything in return. I tried to ignore his obvious lack of ambition because I was too focused on absorbing the positive attention my parents were currently showing me. The first several months in my new house unfolded in a completely perfect manner that effortlessly brought tears of pure gratitude to my tired eyes. Paul and Shirley constantly came over to my place to cook elaborate meals and help tidy up the spacious rooms without ever being asked to do so. They successfully created an incredibly convincing facade of a deeply loving and tightly knit family unit that made me feel entirely cherished after feeling so isolated. "It's so good to have you back home, sweetie. We will take care of you," Mom said, handing me a bowl of soup. I genuinely believed that making the decision to relocate closer to my blood relatives was the absolute best choice I could have ever made for my mental health. I truly thought their constant physical presence would serve as the ultimate healing medicine to help me recover from the lingering trauma of my recently broken marriage. Sitting around the dining table with them made me forget about the massive fortune sitting in my bank accounts and the missing organs in my body. I finally felt like I belonged somewhere safe, where people would love me unconditionally, regardless of my permanent physical flaws. My best friend Chloe eventually made the long drive from her own distant city to spend a quiet weekend visiting my newly furnished Madison property. She ended up being the only person who actually witnessed me completely breaking down into tears on the living room sofa late one evening. Pouring my heart out to her helped me release all the heavy psychological pressure I had been secretly carrying throughout that highly unstable transition period. I confessed all my lingering fears about facing the future alone, while she quietly held my hand and offered the grounding perspective I desperately needed to hear. Her unwavering support provided me with a massive surge of much-needed strength to face the daunting reality of my solitary existence. Having Chloe physically present in my home reminded me of the importance of maintaining strong boundaries, even when dealing with the people closest to me. She carefully listened to my endless praises about my parents, but remained surprisingly cautious about my newly established family dynamic based on my past experiences. She specifically advised me to prioritize my own mental protection before rushing to place my absolute trust in anyone around me, including my own relatives. Just remember to protect your heart, Kendra. You've been through a lot. Chloe warned me right before leaving to drive back to her own home. I hugged her tightly while promising to heed her sensible advice, without realizing how crucial those exact words would eventually become. Almost a month into living in Madison, Dad unexpectedly volunteered to help unpack the remaining cardboard boxes sitting inside my private home office. While organizing the crowded desk, he accidentally stumbled upon my personal bank statements and confidential trust fund files left out in the open. Those private financial records clearly displayed the massive $1 million fortune I had recently acquired from the previous divorce settlement. The neatly organized folder contained highly sensitive documents outlining the exact dividends and property deeds transferred during the peaceful separation. He stood completely motionless near the wooden bookshelf, while silently reading the incredibly high balances listed on the official banking papers. He stared at the staggering numbers printed on those pages for a remarkably long time before carefully placing them back onto the wooden table. Right after that specific afternoon, the overall attitude of my entire family completely shifted in an incredibly disturbing and unnatural direction. Mom and Dad suddenly began treating me like fragile royalty by overly catering to every single minor detail of my daily routine. They started cooking my favorite childhood meals every single evening while actively preventing me from doing any basic household chores. Paul would enthusiastically volunteer to mow my extensive lawn or repair minor fixtures just to ensure he remained physically present nearby. Even Dexter started visiting my house constantly to offer excessive compliments and fake smiles that never genuinely reached his opportunistic eyes. They hovered around my personal space relentlessly while pretending to care deeply about my physical recovery from the recent medical trauma. Mom cleverly started weaving subtle complaints into our daily conversations about their supposedly difficult financial struggles with maintaining their aging property. She would sigh heavily while describing the leaky roof over their kitchen or the constant mechanical failures of their desperately outdated vehicle. Those calculated stories always ended with a hesitant request for a few $1,000s in cash to temporarily fix their escalating domestic problems. Because I desperately craved genuine familial affection and wanted to maintain absolute peace within our household, I completely ignored all the blaring warning signs. I convinced myself that providing financial assistance was a perfectly normal way for a wealthy daughter to repay her supportive parents. I did not hesitate to quickly write multiple generous checks to cover those requested expenses without ever interrogating them about the actual usage. Buying their continued presence felt like a perfectly reasonable price to pay to avoid returning to the suffocating loneliness of my previous solitary existence. The relentless begging eventually reached an absolute breaking point when my parents showed up at my front door looking completely terrified. They urgently requested a truly massive sum of money to immediately pay off a dangerous gambling debt Dexter had secretly accumulated over several months. Shirley was visibly shaking while gripping the edge of my kitchen island as she explained the terrifying severity of the ongoing situation. He had foolishly borrowed heavily from ruthless loan sharks, who were now actively threatening to inflict severe physical harm if the balance remained unpaid. Dexter made a little mistake, but if you don't help him pay this off, they might hurt him. Dad pleaded, avoiding my eyes. Seeing the sheer panic on their faces forced me to grab my checkbook to prevent my reckless brother from facing any violent consequences. I'll write the check this time, but he needs to find a real job and stop relying on us, I replied firmly, handing over the paper. Although I willingly agreed to clear that massive financial burden, the constantly escalating demands finally planted the first real seeds of doubt in my mind. I started to seriously question the underlying motives hiding behind their sudden, overwhelming attention and supposedly unconditional parental love toward me. That massive payment effectively destroyed the comforting illusion of our perfect family reunion by exposing the greedy reality lurking beneath the surface. Late last autumn, the terrifying medical symptoms unexpectedly returned to violently disrupt my supposedly peaceful new existence. The old neurodegenerative disease forcefully reappeared by triggering incredibly severe migraines and alarming episodes of short-term memory loss. Finding myself suddenly forgetting basic daily tasks or completely losing track of time left me absolutely paralyzed with immense fear concerning my immediate future. The crippling physical pain paired with the undeniable mental decline forced me to confront the horrifying possibility of losing my independence entirely. I ultimately decided to share this devastating medical update with Mom and Dad, while desperately hoping to receive some genuine emotional support and immediate healthcare guidance. Sitting them down in my living room, I carefully explained the doctor's recent warnings about the rapid progression of my neurological condition and the expensive treatments required. Instead of displaying any visible signs of parental panic or shedding tears over my deteriorating health, their eyes projected an incredibly eerie and chilling calmness. They simply nodded in a strangely detached manner without frantically offering to accompany me to the hospital or demanding to speak with medical specialists regarding my survival. Later that exact same evening, I realized I had accidentally left my spare house keys sitting somewhere inside their residential property. I chose to drive my vehicle straight back to their driveway without bothering to call ahead because I simply intended to grab the metal ring and leave immediately. Walking up the concrete pathway toward their brightly lit front porch, I noticed the wooden front door remained slightly cracked open against the cool night breeze. I froze completely motionless on the welcome mat when I suddenly overheard an intense whispering session occurring between my parents and Dexter inside the hallway. They were aggressively discussing the absolute necessity of quickly locating and officially hiring a highly professional attorney to represent their collective interests in the near future. Paul sounded incredibly urgent while insisting they needed to prepare specific legal documents, the exact moment my cognitive abilities officially started failing beyond repair. Shirley quietly agreed with his aggressive timeline while demanding they secure the absolute best legal representation available in the entire state of Wisconsin to ensure no mistakes occurred. "We need to contact that lawyer tomorrow morning before her condition gets any worse," Dexter whispered sharply. I stood completely paralyzed on the wooden porch, while straining my ears to uncover the actual underlying purpose behind their urgent quest for legal counsel. Exactly at the precise second Dexter opened his mouth to explicitly reveal the dark objective behind hiring the attorney, my cell phone began ringing aggressively inside my coat pocket. The loud electronic melody violently shattered the quiet suburban atmosphere and immediately cut off their secretive conversation into an absolute dead silence that made my skin crawl. My heart began pounding fiercely against my ribcage as I frantically fumbled with the mobile device to instantly silence the incoming call before they discovered my presence. "Are you guys inside? I forgot my spare keys on the kitchen counter," I called out, pretending I had just walked up the steps after silencing my phone. Shirley quickly opened the door with a fake welcoming smile plastered across her face while nervously handing me the silver keys hanging from a plastic keychain. I snatched the metal object from her trembling fingers and immediately hurried back to my parked vehicle without staying to engage in any further casual conversations. Driving away from their property in a state of absolute panic, I began processing the terrifyingly abnormal behavior my family had just displayed behind my back. Although I could not definitively prove what their ultimate endgame entailed, my defensive instincts were fully activated by the suspicious nature of their abruptly interrupted meeting. I clearly understood that I needed to remain incredibly vigilant around my own blood relatives until I could uncover the hidden truth behind their sinister legal preparations. Exactly 3 days later, Paul and Shirley unexpectedly appeared completely unannounced on my front porch, carrying two massive rolling suitcases ready for an extended stay. "We can't leave you alone in this condition, Kendra. We're moving in to keep an eye on you," Mom announced, dropping her bags. I willingly stepped aside to let them enter my personal sanctuary while secretly harboring intense suspicions about their highly questionable sudden residential relocation. "I appreciate it. I really need the help right now." I lied smoothly, forcing a grateful smile. I immediately began formulating a concrete plan to strictly monitor every single suspicious movement they made while living under my residential roof. During a brief afternoon window when they temporarily left the property, I quickly purchased and installed several micro-surveillance cameras across all the key areas of my home. I placed the tiny digital lenses behind picture frames and decorative plants to ensure they remained entirely invisible to anyone walking through the main living spaces. The following morning, I grabbed my car keys and loudly announced I was leaving the house to buy fresh groceries for the upcoming week. Instead of actually driving to the local supermarket, I simply parked my vehicle a few blocks down the street and immediately opened the live camera feed on my smartphone. Sitting completely hidden inside my parked car, I watched the horrifying reality of their malicious intentions unfold clearly across my bright digital screen. The high-definition footage showed Mom cautiously entering my kitchen before quickly dumping my freshly prepared nutritious meals directly into the running garbage disposal. She immediately replaced those healthy organic portions with highly processed junk food, heavily loaded with chemical additives known to trigger severe allergic reactions. She purposefully intended to systematically destroy my already weakened immune system by secretly forcing me to consume toxic substances disguised as loving home-cooked meals. The situation escalated into an absolute nightmare when the camera feed shifted to show Dad casually strolling into my private bathroom, completely uninvited. He confidently grabbed my incredibly expensive prescription medication bottle containing the crucial pills desperately needed to halt my severe neurodegenerative cognitive decline. The digital recording captured him dumping the authentic medicine into his pocket before refilling my plastic container with completely useless dietary supplements closely resembling my actual pills. The sheer audacity of his actions confirmed my worst fears regarding their willingness to cross ethical boundaries to successfully acquire my personal fortune. Watching my own biological parents actively attempting to accelerate my physical deterioration completely shattered any remaining illusions I held about their supposed parental love. I finally understood they were deliberately trying to worsen my medical condition to execute whatever dark legal strategies they had secretly discussed with Dexter earlier. I sat in my vehicle for another hour collecting my thoughts before finally driving to the actual store to purchase the items I claimed I needed. I returned home carrying several plastic bags of groceries while completely masking the intense rage boiling underneath my deceptively calm exterior. Walking through the front door felt like stepping onto a dangerous battlefield where my supposed caretakers were actively functioning as my primary adversaries. Realizing the full extent of their sinister endgame forced me to immediately start performing an elaborate daily theatrical production to ensure my own physical survival. I began pretending to obediently swallow the fake medication directly in front of their watchful eyes to maintain the convincing illusion of my declining health. I would politely excuse myself to the restroom to discreetly spit the useless capsules into the toilet before flushing the deceptive evidence away forever. I secured my genuine prescription medication inside a locked metal safe located within my home office to ensure they could never access it. I strictly consumed the correct medical dosage prescribed by my neurologist only when I was completely alone behind securely locked doors to protect my recovering mind. A few weeks later, I sat inside the quiet medical clinic, listening intently, while the elderly neurologist reviewed my latest brain scans with absolute astonishment. He happily announced that my strict adherence to the authentic prescription medication had successfully halted the degenerative disease and miraculously restored my cognitive functions entirely. The doctor specifically noted that my brain chemistry showed zero signs of the previous damage that had threatened to permanently erase my entire personal memory. The overwhelming relief washing over me felt completely indescribable after spending so many terrifying months secretly battling both my physical illness and my treacherous relatives. I confidently stepped out of the hospital building, clutching the official medical clearance papers, while feeling an overwhelming surge of genuine happiness coursing through my veins. I immediately pulled out my mobile device and dialed Dad to deliver the incredible news I foolishly thought my family desperately wanted to hear today. I genuinely expected to hear a massive sigh of relief, or perhaps some joyful shouting from the people who originally brought me into this world. "I'm recovered. The doctor said my scans are completely clear," I said, trying to hold back my tears of joy. "There's nothing to celebrate," Dad replied coldly, and the line went dead while I stood completely frozen on the busy concrete sidewalk outside the clinic. My initial shock rapidly transformed into a deep and profound disappointment as the ugly truth finally settled permanently into my fully recovered and clear mind. I realized they genuinely wanted me to suffer a severe neurological decline because my absolute mental destruction was their only pathway to hijack my fortune. They had actively participated in worsening my health by swapping my essential pills to ensure they could effortlessly seize control over my entire banking portfolio. I instantly discarded any lingering sentimental illusions regarding our biological connection and firmly decided to orchestrate one final trap to permanently expose their unforgivable betrayal. Returning to my heavily monitored home, I immediately contacted Chloe to assist me in executing the final phase of my carefully calculated and ruthless retaliation strategy. She arrived at my property later that afternoon carrying a thick leather briefcase filled with heavily customized legal documents prepared by my personal wealth management attorney. She did not visit my house to offer sympathetic hugs or emotional comfort, because we were strictly focused on permanently revoking all their potential inheritance rights. We sat at my dining room table meticulously organizing the binding legal contracts that would permanently block Paul, Shirley, and Dexter from ever touching my money. We carefully reviewed the specific clauses designed to legally terminate any existing medical proxy powers they might have secretly filed behind my back during my illness. "Make sure every legal loophole is closed, Chloe. They won't get a single penny from me," I instructed her as we reviewed the documents. After Chloe securely locked the finalized legal paperwork inside my hidden wall safe, I grabbed my phone to initiate the ultimate phase of my deception. I deliberately lowered my vocal tone to expertly mimic the fragile sound of a rapidly deteriorating patient before calling my parents to deliver my fabricated announcement. I weakly informed them that I wanted to host a special family dinner this upcoming weekend to officially read my final will and testament aloud. I falsely claimed my physical condition was worsening rapidly, and I needed to guarantee my financial legacy was properly secured before I lost my memory entirely. Hearing the explicit mention of my final asset distribution instantly shifted their previously cold attitude into an incredibly enthusiastic and overly supportive tone of voice. Mom and Dexter loudly expressed their absolute eagerness to attend the weekend gathering without having the slightest clue about the devastating consequences awaiting them inside my living room. They eagerly promised to arrive early while secretly anticipating the imminent transfer of my entire multi-million-dollar estate. That weekend, my beautifully decorated living room transformed into a staging ground for the final act of my carefully orchestrated deception. Paul, Shirley, and Dexter arrived wearing their most expensive clothing while eagerly anticipating the official reading of my multi-million-dollar will. They sat perfectly straight on my plush sofa with greedy smiles plastered across their faces while dreaming about the immense wealth about to fall directly into their laps. I confidently walked down the wooden staircase wearing an elegant dress instead of the sickly pajamas they had grown completely accustomed to seeing me wear around the property. I projected an aura of absolute health and sharp mental clarity while cheerfully announcing that my severe neurological condition had been completely cured thanks entirely to their dedicated daily care. Instead of pulling a legal inheritance document from my leather briefcase, I simply picked up the television remote and turned on the massive flat screen mounted on the wall. Let's review the excellent care you've provided me over the last few months, I said, pressing the play button on the remote. The bright digital screen immediately began playing the crystal-clear hidden camera footage, showing Mom ruthlessly dumping my expensive organic meals directly into the kitchen garbage disposal. The video seamlessly transitioned to show Dad casually swapping my crucial prescription medication with completely useless vitamin capsules while standing alone inside my private bathroom. I also played the chilling audio recording capturing their secret midnight conversation regarding hiring a specialized lawyer to forcefully seize control over my entire financial estate. The previously joyful atmosphere inside the living room instantly froze into a suffocating dead silence as their greedy smiles completely evaporated from their suddenly pale faces. They sat completely paralyzed on the expensive furniture while staring at the undeniable visual evidence exposing the horrifying depths of their malicious medical tampering. The devastating betrayal captured perfectly on those digital recordings left them completely unable to formulate a coherent defense against my entirely righteous anger. Kendra, we can explain. It's not what it looks like. Dexter stammered, his face turning pale. I completely ignored his pathetic attempts at formulating a believable excuse while grabbing their designer bags and forcefully tossing them straight out the front door onto the concrete driveway. Get out of my house right now, or the police will see this footage next. I pointed toward the front door. They practically sprinted out of my property without uttering another single word while realizing their despicable scheme had been permanently destroyed beyond any hope of repair. I officially severed all my financial ties with them and permanently blocked their phone numbers to guarantee they could never contact me to beg for another single dollar. Exactly 1 month after that disastrous dinner party, Dexter found himself aggressively surrounded by dangerous creditors demanding the immediate repayment of his massive gambling debts. Paul and Shirley foolishly chose to mortgage their only residential property to rescue their completely irresponsible son from facing severe physical consequences for his reckless financial behavior. The banking institution eventually foreclosed on their heavily indebted home and mercilessly pushed all 3 of them out onto the freezing streets without a single penny to their names. I had already secretly sold my Madison house to an anonymous buyer and quietly relocated to a beautiful coastal city where the warm ocean breeze washed away my painful memories. Walking along the sandy beaches every single morning helped me realize that true family is built on mutual respect rather than a simple biological connection. I no longer felt the crushing weight of loneliness because I had finally learned how to fiercely protect my own peace against predatory individuals. They ultimately destroyed their own comfortable lives through their bottomless greed, while I successfully built a beautiful new sanctuary perfectly tailored to my own independent happiness. Before concluding our story today, please wait a moment. Don't skip away just yet because we need to discuss the deeper meaning behind these events. This story is not just about a woman surviving a terrible physical illness, but about surviving the profound betrayal inflicted by her own blood relatives. The real issue isn't simply the greedy theft of financial assets, but the malicious destruction of a fundamental familial trust that should have protected her. The powerful lesson to take away here is biological connections do not automatically guarantee genuine love or loyalty. If you ever find yourself trapped in a vaguely similar situation, please consider these essential steps. First, prioritize your own physical and mental safety before blindly trusting the seemingly good intentions of those around you. Second, never allow overwhelming guilt or a desperate desire for affection to force you into continuously funding the irresponsible mistakes of toxic family members. Third, Gather concrete, undeniable evidence to protect your legal rights, instead of confronting manipulative people based entirely on unproven suspicions. Always remember, establishing firm personal boundaries against abusive relatives is an absolute necessity for your survival, rather than a cruel punishment. So, if you were placed in this exact situation, would you have publicly exposed your parents at a dinner party or handled it differently? Please share your unique perspective down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications for more incredible true stories.